Hey everyone, welcome back to the stream. This is Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and like I always say, you'll have to watch for yourself to decide if you think that I'm coding it wrong. Glad to be here. I want to say a special thanks to Test Double, my employer, for supporting me in the streaming and kind of making space for this. As a consulting organization, we just love to share things that we've figured out, things that we've learned, and we want to learn from you as well. If you want to work here, if you want us to help you, check out testdouble.com right over there because we would love to talk with you. Yeah. So today we're doing a topic that is a request from my Coding It Wrong Discord group about Nock, a tool for mocking API requests. And that tool is going to be the main focus of our time together, but we're also going to talk about techniques, certainly, like how to think about mocking API requests and why. And hopefully there will be time for us to look at a few alternative approaches as well. I want to look at mock Service Worker, as that's very popular, and I want to look at Jest module mocking, as there's pros and cons to that, and maybe a better fit for your use case, depending. But all the principles about what we're trying to assert on, what we're trying to test, are going to carry over because our mentality about testing is somewhat independent of our tools, and I always like to level us up in terms of our mentality for our testing. So with that, let's get started. Nock is the tool we're going to be using. It's github.com/nock/nock. It just occurred to me that maybe that's a joke. It's a great one, if so. It's an HTTP server mocking and expectations library for Node.js. But really, I'm just showing the page here to get you used to it. We're going to be looking at code, one of my open source apps together today. This is Surely. You may be familiar if you've been on the stream before. It's a React Native web app that runs on mobile, iOS, and it runs on the web as well. And it's a to-do list app because that's what I need and want. I have tests already using Nock, but I've stripped them out. And so if we look at the test for the available screen here, we're going to test a few different scenarios, and we're going to look at how to think about this testing and how to use Nock to do it and go from there. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. And I will say, if you are live on the stream, please say hello in the chat. Please ask questions or give feedback or your own thoughts. It's very welcome. If you're watching the recording afterwards, we'd love to hear from you in the comments as well. Any thoughts or perspectives or experiences that you have had. So let's jump in. What scenarios are we testing on the available screen here? There's to-dos you can see. They load up. You can drill into the details. Mark says a to-do app, that's impossible. Yes, absolutely. Good to see you again, Mark, or talk with you. To see your name, because we used to work together in Slack, and that's where I saw you before. On the screen, you can also add a new to-do. You just test in like great to-do, say hello to Mark. And we can put that to-do in there, and it shows up in the list. So what do we want to test in this scenario? Let's look at my test cases. For the available test screen, my first test case was an error scenario. When there's an error loading to-dos, we confirm that it shows the error message. One of the nice things about automated testing for API requests is that it's easier to simulate error scenarios that are more frustrating or kind of tedious to test manually. You can test them manually, and sometimes that's important while developing, but to keep that error scenario in front of you to make sure it keeps working, having an automated test really helps. I should pause to say, real quick before we move on, do you even want to mock API calls? In some circles we say realism is the most important thing. It's the most important thing for confidence in your tests. And there's definitely a space to have automated tests to run against your mobile app or your web app to hit the real backend, maybe even multiple other backend systems that you're connecting with. So that's the best when it comes to realism. There are some downsides to hitting real APIs in your automated tests, though, that are important to consider. Flakiness. A network connection could drop. That server could be down. Test data setup can be complicated, or even if it's supposed to be there, if someone goes in and removes that test data or messes things up, that can cause your tests to fail. Now that this leads to the fact that not all automated tests are the same. That kind of realism can be helpful for some what you might call end-to-end tests, testing your whole company, organization, enterprise system together. Maybe you run those on a schedule basis. Maybe quality engineers run those and they look at the results and they see if failures are due to flake or if they seem like a real result. However, on the developer side, I'm used to having tests that run on a continuous integration server, and they need to pass 100% or the PR cannot be merged. And so for those kind of tests, those kind of developer tests, the flakiness, the instability of having a separate backend to connect with is usually not helpful. Probably that's going to create a lot of false negatives. So for developer tests running on CI, usually I like to test my front-end app or mobile app in isolation. So I'm just testing that system by itself and saying, does it work? Does it do what it needs to do? And so mocking is really helpful with that. You kind of, at one point or another, you kind of slice things off from the back end and you say, is just my front end app working correctly? And as we're about to see, when we think about testing mentality, it allows you to see what are the inputs and outputs of the front end system. So for unit tests, component tests, even for a test of your entire front end system that run on CI, I highly recommend mocking API calls or any external systems one way or the other. So with that said, let's think about our test here. So far in our test, we're rendering out this available screen, this available component. Providers here is just wrapping it with React providers because that's the way React is, some setup stuff. And what we're confirming that happens here is we're confirming there's an alert that shows up on the screen that says an error occurred while loading to-dos. And we focused into just this one test with dot only. So let's take a look at the test here. Interesting, it's actually passing already. I'm wondering why that is. You'd think I would check these things before the stream. I wonder if the fact that we're not mocking the back end at all is leading to a failure there. But maybe let's come back to that. Maybe, yeah. Let's increase my personal confidence by going on to another case, one that probably will not pass out the gate. And maybe we can come back to that one once we've learned. So when there are no available to-dos, it shows a message when no to-dos are listed. That test name has not been updated. Shows a message that there are no to-dos. It's always nice to clean things up as you go through there. So we render out the component and we confirm you have no available to-dos. Nice work. The test fails and it says it's unable to find an element with that text. You have no available to-dos. Nice work. Okay, so we need to figure out how to simulate this scenario. We need our fake mocked backend to send back a success response that has no to-dos in it. So how can we do that with Nock? So when you import Nock from here, it's just an npm package. You can use it in your test, and you set it up before you do the rendering, generally, to be ready. So with Nock, you kind of specify first the base path. Thank you for language server protocol, or the URL that we're requesting. So Nock is going to mock out localhost 3000. Because that's my default server when I'm running locally, and that happens in the tests as well. So mocking out that server, what are we going to do? We chain onto this object the request that we want to mock, and then we chain on the response that we want. So I happen to know the request here because I'm looking at my cheater monitor with my old code. But if I didn't know, I would look into the code or look into the running app to see what requests are sent. And I say there's a get request going to /todos. So localhost 3000 /todos. And actually I send a bunch of query parameters here. I'm going to copy and paste over. I'm using a JSON API format API. And so the way that I do the search is with this filter parameter. We say, give me all the to-dos with status available and include the categories as well. We have this category concept on the to-dos to group them together. All these details would be totally different in your system, but if you're using HTTP to make a call, you could use Nock with a .get here to mock it out to identify it. GraphQL runs over HTTP, but it's a little different, and if you're using WebSockets or Firebase, mocking might be going a bit of a different way, but in the same sense, you might be thinking about philosophy in the same way. What do I expect from the server, and what is coming back? So I'm really specifying here, I need my app to hit this endpoint on the server, and I'm going to get some data back. Let me add that data in before I address sort of a philosophical question here. So after the call to .get, you chain on reply. And then you can pass in the reply. And let's let language service protocol. Okay, there's a lot going on there. So let me look at my cheater monitor instead. A simple way to configure the reply is the HTTP response code. So you could have 200 OK. And then you send the response data, which can be objects, can be JSON objects to send things back. So I'm going to bring over my response here. This is, the format of this depends on just the format of your API. And for my JSON API format, there's a data array. And I happen to know that an included array is needed as well, or else things will blow up. So I say response. You can even say no to-dos Yeah, respond with the no to-dos response. I didn't have that in before, but that makes this a little bit more readable. So this is saying if, and this doesn't need to be called, but if we call this server with this path, then reply with the no to-dos response. So let's pause for just a second. I'm pretty sure with Nock and with a lot of these libraries, you can specify like, oh, I don't care about the query string, or I don't care about all the details here. Match in a more fuzzy way the request made to the server. So I could probably get this test to pass if I just said to-dos question mark with whatever, like in some way just kind of specify, I don't care what's passed in the query string. So why did I type that in? When we think about what we're testing here, how can we make sure that our front-end app is working correctly? We need to make sure that it sends a request to the right endpoint on the server, because if it filters by status deleted, that's going to return the wrong thing. So part of what we want to specify here is that the full path to the URL happens. If you had something like a date that was changing in there, maybe you want to make that fuzzy. In a teaching resource I have an API key that is a wildcard there. But specifying this is important to make sure the app is working, because we don't have the realism of hitting the server. We want to make sure that the correct request is sent over to there. And at that point, what the test is basically saying is, assuming that I make this request to the server, if I get a response like this, make sure that I get the correct "you have no available to-dos" message rendered out. So let's save this and see if I did it right. The test runs, and it passes. When there are no available to-dos, we get that message there correctly. Now let me make sure that I've done this right, because whenever I see a test pass, I want to see it fail as well. I don't know if it's sort of self-loathing or something like that. It really is the TDD mentality. But I want to make sure that my test is really confirming things correctly. So if I say you blah have no available to-dos, I want to make sure this test will fail if a different message is not found. Unable to find the element with text you blah. So this is really confirming that this text message is really found on the screen. When we get a no to-dos back, that is shown. So we're good to go. So now that we have one example here, we can go back to the error case and I can make sure that that one happens as well. Let's copy and paste Nock and make a change here. Let's move this up. Actually, you know what? It occurs to me what I can do here is I can, let me put the no to-dos response in here. So first, I'm going to make this fail. I'm going to return a successful response and make sure that this error is out because the test fails because the error message is not shown. Then when I change it to an error response, we should start seeing the error message. So if that makes sense, let's save and see what happens. We run the error test. Unable to find an element with accessibility role alert. And we saw last time when we looked at these accessibility role matchers, probably this means that maybe there's no alert, or maybe the alert doesn't say that error message. But regardless, we're not getting that error message in there. So now what I expect to see is if I change this to a 500, and I probably don't need the data in there either. If I change this to an error 500 from the server, we should get the same. We should now start getting the error message here. An error occurred while loading to-dos. I save, and it passes. So that gives me confidence because we saw the test red and then we saw it green, that we really are confirming that this error message shows, and it really is the change to an error response with no data there that causes that. So that's great. We're testing the error response as well. When you have conditionals like that, it's important to test both sides, when the error message shows and when it doesn't. When there's a empty state and when there's a full state. So let's move down. When there are available to-dos. Now this is actually kind of the more normal expected case. We wanted to display the available to-dos from the server. And we're making sure that this category shows up, and we're going to make sure that a to-do name shows that it's truthy. So I'm going to save and make sure this fails first, because I think it's going to fail without our mocking. That confirms that our mocking is actually going to make it pass. Yep, I can't find an element with text my category 1. So in a similar way, we're going to set up that mocking, and we're just going to put in a result. Paste that in here. And let's get rid of this for just a moment, because I don't think we need that. So we set up a response. This has a to-do and a category. This is pre-existing test data that I had before, but let's just go up to visualize that. Yes, the to-do is up here. This is just the data structure of what we have. This is what kind of connects it to the category. And then in the category, it says my category and to-do one. So you don't have to have those as separate variables, but I do here because they're used a few different places. So I set up that response. We can even call it response with a to-do. So in this case, when I hit the same URL, we want a success reply that has a response with a to-do. We render it out, and we're going to confirm that we're going to wait for a category to show with an account next to it. That's what that's for. We make sure that the to-do name shows as well. So that test was failing. Now with this Nock mocking added in, we save, we check that test, and it passes. Great. We're going to skip over this navigation test because that's not directly related to mocking, and we're going to move down. Now we're talking about adding, making changes. This is going fast, so I hopefully will be able to get a good amount of time about Jest module mocking and mock service worker, but we'll see. We'll see. You never know when it comes to the length of this stream. Okay, adding. It allows adding a to-do. So now we're changing data. So let's think about the strategy here. We render out the component. This find by here is just waiting for the state of the screen to fully load before we move on. And so then we say we get that field by label text new to-do name, the new to-do field. We fire event change text, so we type into it. And then we fire a submit editing event on the add field to submission because there's not a button to press. We hit return is the way it's coded to do that. So what do I want to assert at that point? Well, there's mocking that needs to happen. Actually, you know what? Before I even answer that, let's see what happens currently. Save, hit available. Unable to find an element with text to do one. Okay, so we're actually not getting to the point that the to do shows up in the list. So let's get that started first before I do anything else. I think that's this. Yeah, there's going to be some duplication here, and in my real code I have that separated out, but just to make things simple. So just to get past the first point, we're going to set up the get here. And so if you have a get before a post or data loading before data saving, that's probably necessary in your mocking. Maybe you could put it somewhere shared to reduce the repetition. Okay. So now we get the update was not wrapped in an act warning, our favorite. Oh, and check it out. It's due to set error message. An error occurred while creating the to-do. And so that's helpful to know because we got a green check here. So if you're not thinking closely, you could think, oh, my adding test is working. Well, you need to make sure that the adding is actually working. But this act, built-in functionality to React is actually letting us know a state change happened afterwards. And maybe you want to know about that. Maybe that is a problem that you didn't want to happen. So an error occurred while creating the to-do. So at least we want to get this resolved, right? So how can we prevent this error? Well, on the end of this chain here, we can chain another call, which in my case is a post. So it's an HTTP post, so we can put that on there. And let me see, that endpoint is /todos. Just because I was lazy in the library that I wrote for HTTP requests, there's always a question mark on here, even when there's no query string, so that's kind of funny. And so on the post request, so if we do a post request, let me do this first. So right now what we're trying to do is to get this error to stop from happening. I do not want to be warned. I want to have everything to be happy. So from this post to this endpoint, I want to reply of 200, and let's just pop in, well, let me do this. This is a simple data structure there that's going to prevent things from blowing up. So let's save here and see what happens in the test. All right, it is passing. There's this import a file after the Jest environment has been torn down, and I can't remember if that's a real problem or not, but let me hit return. I do not know, but I think that might go away as we do other things. So we have now gotten the test to pass without error. Nothing is blowing up. We are firing the submit editing event, and we're not getting an error that an error message is shown on the screen or anything like that. So we have silenced the test. So is that enough? Are we asserting enough to make sure that our app is working? Well, in some sense, we'd like to sort of see that to-do show up in the list. That seems like that would be valuable. But even beyond this, another thing that I would say is when it comes to saving data on a server, it's not enough to make sure that you're just posting to that endpoint. In fact, I could just delete out all the data that was sent there and it would still pass. Let me actually do that. I've got some levels of nesting here, so that might not work out so well. On create to do, create available to do. Yeah, so I got this to do client that I have that I'm calling create on it, and I'm passing an attribute of name. But what if I say the attribute of the name is this is not the real name? So I want my test to fail because I'm not passing the real correct name. I'm passing a bad one, not the name that was passed in here. So I'm going to hit save. And our test still passes. So do we care? Yes, we do. We want to make sure that the real correct name is passed to the server. We want to make sure that that new to-do name I typed in there is really correctly sent. And so we want to assert on that. So let's add an assertion that'll fail now, and then when we fix our production code, it'll start working. It turns out, just like for this get, that we wanted to make sure all these query string parameters were passed, for our post, we want to confirm on the body. It is important that we send the right data to the server, not just that we get the right response back that causes our app to work or not blow up. So in here, we want to say data. Following the JSON API format, this is not too complex, so we can assert against all of that. We could say type to-dos, and we can say attributes name is to-do name. This is where it is. So I set up a variable here for the to-do name, my new to-do, and I set that up specifically so I could pass it up here. And I will say again, the details of this format this is JSON API. So whatever post format you have to your server, you put your data in there. But this is saying only match this if the correct to-do name is sent in, and do not match otherwise. So let's save and see what happens in our test. We want our test to fail because we're not sending the right data to the server. Where's it gone? There we go. All right, let's see what happened. All right, act. An update to-do list screen inside a test was not wrapped in act. We're getting an error message. An error occurred while creating the to-do. So this is good. This means that something is going wrong. We're not hitting the server correctly. Let's fix our code by passing the real name into here and see if we start matching. It passes again. So this means that when we assert on this, it says, Nock says, look for a post to this endpoint with this post data, and if that is found, reply with the success 200 state. So we've added verification here. We're verifying that the correct output is going from our front-end app to our back-end. And when we're isolating our front-end from our back-end, that's not an implementation detail, that's the contract. That's the output of the front-end application as it talks to the back-end, and so that's important to assert on. So what else do we want to see happen? There is here clearing out of the text field, but at my kind of high granularity screen test, I'm not verifying that at this point. But the other thing that I'd like to assert is, so what happens next, it depends on your implementation. So when it comes to changing data on a server that affects something you've pulled down, there's kind of two approaches, and I forget the theoretical names for them. But basically, you can say, either, I have the data locally to add to that list. I could insert that new to-do into this array here. That's kind of updating the local cache is sort of the way that approach works. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to take that opportunity to pull the data down from the server again. Instead of me messing with the format of the data and the array locally, how can I pull down, I'm just going to ask the server to tell me the updated data because I know there's been a change because I've made a post. A few advantages to that approach are if other data has come in or been deleted in the meantime, you'll get the freshest data at that time. Another benefit is you're not duplicating the ordering logic in your client. Your server is telling you what order things are coming back in, if that is in fact where that logic lives, and so you don't need to repeat it here. And so the way you'll test this is different in these two cases because when you slice off the back end and you say, oh, what's happening in the front end, that differs. Like, am I getting data back from the post and working with that, or am I doing another GET request after the fact? And so you have to write your test differently in those two different scenarios. In our case for this app, I am refreshing the data from the server. One of the reasons I decided that is not a lot of to-dos. If you have a lot of to-dos, like please complete them or defer them. So that's the way I coded it, and that's the way we need to test it. So how can I do that? Let me look at my cheating server here. Oh, I have not copied and pasted everything correctly. Response with a to-do. Okay. Find with text to-do 1. Wait for. To-do. Interesting. My notes have suspiciously not helped me out here. Let me instead fly by the seat of my pants, and we'll code it live instead. So let me think about this. So we do the initial get to get the data. We post and then get a response back. And then after that, we're going to do another get is what we expect to happen. Another get to that same endpoint. Let's see if this works this way. Yeah. Okay. So let's make another response. This is going to be a little verbose. Response with to-do added. So we're going to say we do another get, and we get a response with the to-do added. But even that, I could code that. I could code the second response that comes back with another to-do added and make sure that new to-do comes on the screen. And that kind of simulates what will happen. So maybe there's some realism to that. But in a sense, that's not actually the most important thing that I need. What I want to do is to make sure that that second get request happens. And that's more important than whatever the data comes back. Because I don't know what data will come back. Maybe that to-do was added and then deleted again. Maybe all kinds of other to-dos will come back. So my app doesn't guarantee that a response comes back with the to-do added. I just need to make sure I get the refreshed data from the server. So let's, instead of a response with the to-do added, let's just return the same response again. And we just need to make sure that that is called again. We just need to make sure that the data is refreshed. So I think this is the way we can do that, is we can kind of verify that the calls happen. And I'm going to be able to break this afterwards. So when we chain this onto Nock, we can assign the response. And we can say, I like to call it mocked server. So mocked server is all this. We don't have to do this. But what this gives us the option of saying is mocked server is done. We want to confirm that all the correct requests have been made to the mocked server. And we do need to put this in a wait because it's going to be a little while asynchronously before that happens. So how we do that in React Native testing library is we await wait for, and we want to expect mock server is done to be true. So what this does is wait until the timeout, up to 5 seconds, and make sure that all of these requests are actually made. So let's see if it passes, and then I'm going to try breaking it in various ways so we can be sure of what we're actually verifying here. Save. It passes. So whatever this is doing, it's confirming that things happen. Let's first add a bad get URL here. So this request is not made. Let's make sure it fails if this request is not made. And let's see what the output is that we get. It fails. Expected true to be false. And let's see if, yeah, we don't get a lot of good output there. So that's unfortunate. I think it might be by virtue of the fact that this is in an expect. Because it keeps trying mock server is done and blows up if not. So unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head how to get better error output out of that, but that's good. So let's now try, let's see if there's an additional get request that's the same. I want to make sure that we're not getting a false positive because this request was made at the start. So what I'm hoping is if I put an additional request on there, it's going to fail. And it does. So that means that when I put this on here, that means that this get request is really being made multiple times. And actually, let's go back to one of our other tests to see that happening in the other direction. Let's say when there are available to-dos, this test here. Oh, I don't have the verify though, but let's add it in to see. So say I said, oh, the get request should happen twice. And I say const mocked server equals that. If we were to say, let's make sure all the requests are made. That's really what mock server is done is doing, is everything we've mocked actually being called? Let me take this out first. So I expect here when we added this in, the mock server is going to be done because all these calls are really made. Save and it passes. So now what if I add in an extraneous get request? I believe that mock server is done is never going to go to true to say that, oh yeah, those things that you mocked in there, that's not really what happened. We save, it runs, and it fails. And then when we go back to the one request, it does pass. So this raises the question of, why didn't we do this? Why did I not check mock server is done before? So when you're querying data, usually the thing you need to check is like, is the data coming back and being shown on the screen? And if the data is not coming back, there's no way for me to show it on the screen. And so in that case, once I've confirmed that I see that to-do name on the screen, I have all that I need, and I don't feel the need to check if the mock server is done at all. So for tests that related to reading data, I don't generally feel the need to make sure that the mock server is done. Whereas with adding here, now our screen happened to blow up if we didn't post, but say the post functionality was removed entirely. Calling mock server is done makes sure that we actually hit the server with the post happening. And let's actually, to see that, let me comment this out. Let me comment out this getting, and we'll just add the posting in. Let me get this running, and then I'll be able to describe because I'm thinking through this live. Oh. Only. Yeah, I was running the whole file. The adding a to-do test. We're getting that reference error, that import thing, but it is passing. So again, at this point, I'm just going through the steps and doing the post here, and it comes back. So what if I don't do the post at all to the server? What if in create available to do, I just return promise.resolve? Something else might blow up, so I might not be able to simulate this correctly. We'll see. An update to a new form, clearing up the name happens after the test is done. Yeah, this is going to be too hard to simulate. So let me not do that, but instead we'll just talk through it. So why am I calling mock server is done in this add test? Say all of that posting, all of that saving was gone and none of it was in there. Say there was some conditional that we hit where we didn't even attempt to save to the server. Maybe the text field was empty, so we just got a validation error instead. Everything might be green, but the request was not sent to the server. So when I'm doing a post, it's not enough to see the right result going on the screen. I want to make sure that the server was actually called. It is important to make sure that request was sent to the server. And so mock server is done confirmed that happened. In this case, there's another thing that mock server is done is checking for us as well. We had the data on the screen, and in this case, I'm not simulating the second record coming back. I could, in which case, if the second record was on the screen, that was enough to give me confidence. But since I'm not doing that, in fact, what I'm just checking is that request to the server made? And if that is done, I don't need to retest the rendering out of an additional item and stuff like that. It is enough for me to just confirm that the reload to the server is in fact called. So that's the two values that mock server is done is providing for me here. So I think that's the end of our Nock testing. And with that, we're going to go and look at some alternatives and compare them together and see why I currently go with Nock. You don't have to. If you find another alternative that works for you, that's great. You know about something new and greater. I certainly haven't tried all the alternatives out there, but if it works for me, it works for me until I find something that works better. So let's talk about alternatives to Nock and what you think. So mock service worker is very well known. It's well talked about. It's useful for testing. It's useful for front-end development. All kinds of testing. Guy at the last client that I worked at through consulting was very knowledgeable about it, doing really cool stuff in tests that had some really neat constraints as far as performance with mock service worker. So there's really cool stuff. So let's talk about the testing approach that I describe here. First, there's a spot in here in the mock service worker docs about request matching. And it says, to determine which outgoing request should be mocked, mock service worker performs request matching. There's some matching terminology, but basically that's what we did in Nock as well. We said, if a get request matching this URL and query string and post body happens, return this response. And request matching is important to make sure that the the request being sent is correct, that it's not wrong, or maybe if you have multiple requests going out, make sure that the right response comes back. That didn't come up in our scenario, but that can happen, especially if you have a lot of data, not just my trivial to-do list app. So how does request matching work? You can match by request method, by request URL, by path. Okay, yep, users, they got wildcards there, that's cool. Path with parameters, and then that's the end. We're down to GraphQL. And so I need the post body. Like I want to know how that works. How we match based on post body. And as we go through here, we found that that's not actually an option provided. Mock Service Worker doesn't provide a way to match by post body or any body in HTTP. So we would not be able to do this. Instead, with Mock Service Worker, it would be the equivalent of this. We can confirm if we're posting, we get this reply back. And as we've seen, that's not enough to specify the output of our front-end app. We need to make sure that the correct name is being sent, not just that something is being posted. Confirming that something posted will keep our app from blowing up, and that could be useful in the case of if we're just trying to run our front end independently of a back end. So Mock Service Worker can be great for that. But for specifying what the output is in a post request, Mock Service Worker doesn't out of the box give me what I need. Let's look at another page on there. Request assertions. When testing, it may be tempting to write assertions against a dispatch request. Examples of such assertions can include checking that a request was issued with the correct body. Adding such assertions, however, is implementation details testing and is highly discouraged. Asserting requests in such a way is testing how your application is written instead of what it does. I'm getting a little riled up here. I don't want to throw Mock Service Worker or the authors of it under the bus, and I won't put them uniquely because this is something I hear from a number of different purposes in a number of different places in React testing. If you do this, this is implementation details testing. That's a very black and white statement. Depending on how you've designed things, depending on how you think about things, it might or might not be implementation details testing. If you say, oh, don't do that, we need a real backend to be able to run our application, to be able to write our tests. And I've made the case to you that our front end does not work. We are not confirming that our front end works unless we're asserting on the post body. So just because somebody in the JavaScript ecosystem makes a very clear statement like that, this is implementation details testing, it can feel like shaming. It can feel like, oh, wow, if I do this, I'm definitely wrong. I don't think these people intended that or anything like that, but you can have a fear where when somebody says something in a very black and white way, I better not to do that. I must be a bad developer if I do that. And I'm here to tell you that things are usually more gray than that. And I've made a case for why our tests are not sufficient here unless we're matching on the post body. And so my friend Norfeld on the Coding Wrong Discord showed a way that with Mock Service Worker, he was able to get this matching working, and that's great. It's a bit indirect. And in fact, with Nock, I like the fact that I can just do this very expressively in a very straightforward way. All right, nothing against any open source maintainers. Thank you for your software. But I really care about when people say things in a black and white way that prevent people from writing good tests, in my opinion. If your opinion differs from me, that's fine. If you share your opinion as though it's the absolute truth, that gets me extremely frustrated, and I'm going to tend to push back. So I should do more streams about things that get me riled up. So that's why Mock Service Worker is not my number one tool that I reach for when it comes to these type of situations. Let's talk about another alternative that's fairly different. Jest module mocks. So this is actually something that's generic, not specific to APIs. And it's a way for whenever you're importing something else, you can mock it out and mock out the responses that come back. Interestingly, I have forgotten this, that Jest docs actually give Axios as an example. So, that you can mock out at the Axios level, and you can say, here, I want to mock the resolved value there. So in my teaching materials for introduction to testing in React Native, I actually teach Jest module mocking. And one of the reasons I do that is it's generic. So whether you're using Axios, whether you're using HTTP or GraphQL or anything, Jest module mocking will work for you. And I love giving people reusable test solutions because you don't want to get into a situation where you're like, oh, I'm using this library. There's not a testing tool provided for it. I guess I can't do tests. That's when you can get stuck and unable to test your app, and you end up falling back on manual testing and your maintainability suffers. But Jest module mocking is an extremely reusable way so that whatever kind of crazy, awesome new JavaScript library you're getting your data from, you can mock it out and you can write your tests that you need to write. You're not constrained. So let's take a look at Jest module mocking. There's other pros and cons as well when it comes to mocking things out. And this I don't have cheater code on, so we're going to have to code it live and see what happens, and we'll see how that goes. So let's show it in action. When there are no available to-dos, it shows a message that there are no available to-dos. Let me get that test running. Yeah, okay, it's passing. So let's strip out this Nock code. I'll comment it out so we can compare it. Let's keep the no to-dos response. This should fail because we're not mocking this out. And it does. Unable to find an element with the text, you have no available to-dos. Nice work. So how can we mock things out here? Well, when it comes to Jest module mocking, you can mock a module at any level. You can in fact mock Axios as they did there. But I often find that it's useful in my apps. I often have a, I think I had this before, authenticated HTTP clients. So this was a place where I imported Axios. I created an Axios instance. I configured the base URL. I made this a function because when we pass in the token, this way we can set up authorization. That's why that works. But I want to mock this out. So that can be easiest. It's probably going to be easiest actually if I show mocking Axios itself, because this has the same API as that. Oh, but it's calling axios.create, so that's going to be trouble. So to avoid that, I'm going to do authenticated HTTP client. All right, let's see how unwise this is that I wasn't prepared with code snippets here. So even though there's a tiny bit of my own code here, it's mostly just configuration. And really what I want to say is whatever HTTP client I've set up, let me mock it out, the requests and responses that come back. So we're going to mock this module. To do this, we want to import that module into the test, and that's in authenticated HTTP client from ... data authenticated HTTP client. All right, so we import that because we're going to need access to that in the test to make our assertions. And then we call jest.mock. Jest.mock. We put in the same name as the import statement there. And sometimes that's enough. Oftentimes you need some extra stuff here, but let's just do this first and see what happens. Probably it's just going to say some general error and not give us any details. Oh, it just says unable to find an element. Okay. All right, so let's see how far we can go without me being prepared here. Authenticated HTTP client. Is .get called on that? I think that function is called. It returns nothing. Load available to-dos. Let me log this out here. Success, to-do response. And we're gonna call catch here. Console error failure E. So when you're mocking here, it's a bit like I gotta figure out what's happening in this code, so let's see what happens. It didn't get logged. All right, let's, y'all, I might not be able to demo this very well. I apologize if so. Is this getting called? Load available to-dos. So somebody said on one of my YouTube videos, I like that you're not prepared. I like to see you fail. And they didn't mean it bad at all. They were saying that they learned from this. So for those of you who are encouraged by this, great. For those of you who are not encouraged by it, I'm sorry. So, all right, let's see if we're actually hitting this branch of code. Loading to-dos. But neither success or failure are being hit. I wonder if it's because it's not returning to-do client. What is to-do client? Use to-dos. To-dos is here. So we get authenticated HTTP client. That's the thing. There's all these layers of indirection. So when it comes to module mocking, this can get kind of challenging. You could just mock at the to-dos level. Let me just see, yes. Let's see what the HTTP client is at that point. Undefined. Okay. All right, so this is helpful. This is giving us steps. So the HTTP client that we're mocking out, that it's giving us a function that can be called, but the result of that function is undefined. So I think what we want here is we want to define what that is, and I gotta find the way to do the default. This is an object. I think this is gonna blow up now. Authenticated HTTP client.default is not a function. So because we're doing a default import, we want default. So something close to this. So we're mocking the return value of that module, and hopefully it's the default. I think there's like one extra thing we need to do. No, so this is Jest module mock default export. We got to Google this. Yeah, this is it. ES module true. ES modules are still a mystery to me. But when you're mocking output, if you have a default export you need to say ES module true, I believe. So let's see if we get that function that returns hi, hi, hi. Yep, HTTP client is hi, hi, hi. So we can now control which HTTP client that to-dos gets here. So HTTP client is going to be an object. And I happen to know, because I've dug through all these layers of abstraction, that well, actually, even through here, we know it returns something that matches the Axios signature. And so we can put, actually, you know what we're going to do here? There's different ways to organize this, but we're going to say Jest function. Y'all, I am not prepared. Oh, authenticated HTTP client is this, and that is the default. So yeah, so this is going to become this. So then I think what we can say is down here, we can say authenticated HTTP client mock return value of the client. So let's see if this correctly allows us to control the return value there. It does. We're getting the client. So now here within our test, we can return an object, and now we can start to match this. There is complexity. See the downside to this approach? So we can say there is a get method on here, and get, well, we don't need to make any assertions on it, so we can just say, this will be easy. Get is going to return promise.resolve. It's going to resolve to no to-do's response. Yeah, I think that's right, because this is the response value, and that's what Axios would return, although I think there's another level of nesting. I think there's a data, because Axios returns an object, and the response data is just one bit of it. Get function get. Unable to find an element with text, you have no available to-dos. Loading to-dos. So is get, oh no, this is a function that returns a promise. No, it's not. No, it's not. Get is a function. Return this. Called get. Let's see if get is being called. Get is called. I think what we need, no, what we need to do is the whole thing needs to be in a promise resolve. And now it is passing. We got success with our data that's empty and included that's empty. Okay, so let's strip some of this out. Let's strip some of this out. passing. We can get rid of this console log and get rid of this console log and this catch. We don't need to get it all out. We'll just get things a little bit more simple to get the test that's simply passing. Got one more log here in todos.js. So the test is passing, and the test will fail if we don't mock out this endpoint, mock out this module call. It fails. So this, with Jest module mocking, is equivalent to this, but not quite, because notice we don't know the URL that's being passed here. So we actually would need to make another point here. We need to say expect and actually we need to save this into a variable. We'd say const we put this into here, say client, give it a nice name, and say this returns the client. And then we could say this would need to be a jest.function. That actually could turn into this, mock resolved value. Let's actually remove this expect to make sure this new form actually works. It's still passing. And now we can say expect client.get to have been called with this. We can make sure that that method is called with the right arguments. We'll save, see if it passes. Oh, and I see there's a typo. So in the way that this method is called, we actually don't have the slash in front of it. Axios actually adds that in. Or, no, yeah, we don't have the slash in front of it. So the method is called with this. There is a slight difference there. But we can see from that that it's making sure that exactly the right thing is called to that method. So, as we saw, just making a GET request to the server is not enough. It needs to go to the right endpoint, and it needs to have the right query string on there. And so when you're using Jest module mocks, unless you do it in another way that I haven't really run across, the mocking of the resolve value is separate from the confirmation about how it was called. So that's one downside to Jest module mocking. Another downside is all that stumbling I had to do to figure it out. And if you were setting it up for the first time, you might stumble in similar ways. A new team member on your team might stumble in similar ways. Whereas Nock helps there with actual kind of being a bit more straightforward. To be fair to the mock service worker folks, this is sort of starting to get into implementation details. I have to think about stuff like what module is this coming from, and where is there a promise and where is there not a promise. And so that is details that kind of clutter up my tests, and they make them a little bit fragile, where if I type something wrong, it's not going to be obvious, but I might get a mysterious, obscure error. So that is one of the downsides of Jest module mocking for mocking out API clients. The upside is the fact that we're deconnected from anything HTTP related at all. Again, if it's GraphQL, if it's WebSockets, if it's Firebase, you can mock out a Jest module and you can supply the data you need for your app. Might be a little bit more work. Whereas when you're doing HTTP, Nock is really helpful in that regard because it doesn't care about those details. It doesn't care about how all those things are wired up. It just cares that eventually an HTTP request is made it out. And again, the fact that I can combine both the asserting on the request query string and the response together. Even down here, the asserting on the post body and the reply coming back, that is all in one place. And so that makes for a good readable test. It's not so obvious with this giant font size here, and there's some duplication. But you can see I expect a GET request, and then a POST request, and then a GET request. And that is all shown there. And then mock server is done. Just make sure, are the requests that happen, do they match the configuration I put up above? So let's zoom back out and talk about the big picture before we end the stream here. We have at least 3 different options for mocking out API calls to the server. We've got Nock, which is for HTTP mocking. We've got mock service worker that is very similar there. And Jest module mocks, which can mock out any module. What benefits do we see? Nock is my preferred choice right now amongst the ones that I've tried because it allows me to really expressively think about the inputs and outputs sent there so that I can make sure that the right calls are made, I can make sure that the right responses come back, and then check that the right things happen on my server, even to the point of making sure that an API call is reloaded and called the second time. I can verify that in a very expressive way with Nock's API. Jest module mocks, we saw a lot of complexity there. The ability we have to apply it to many different scenarios means we have to take on this responsibility of getting the configuration just right, even to the point of configuring that ES module thing there. If it changes to not be an ES module, now you have to change your mocks and your tests. That's some complexity. And with Mock Service Worker, I got a little riled up as I talked about the fact that in this test, when you're isolating the front end from the back end, you do need to know if, I'm saying this positively, so let me back off because I don't want to be guilty of the same thing that got me riled up. In my approach to testing, it seems to me that I'm not fully verifying what's going out to the back end, to the server, if I don't verify the post body that's going out. And I lose precision to my tests. I lose verification. It's all about this approach to testing where you're segmenting off. I'm testing the front end in integration, but I'm isolating it from the back end. And if you do that, you need to verify the contract. What are the outputs and what are the inputs coming back? So in that kind of contract testing, testing of the contract, I should say, if you're taking that approach, Mock Service Worker doesn't seem to provide the tools necessary out of the box to do that. And it's discouraging it. And it might discourage you how they write about it in the docs. So if Mock Service Worker is working for you, great. If you find that you don't need that verification of the post body going up, that's great as well. Or if you found a good way to do it, then that's awesome. You really should take the freedom to use whatever tools work for you. For me, for this kind of testing approach, Nock works really great, and I'd advocate it to you. Both that tool and this approach to testing, thinking about testing the contract. What are the inputs and what are the outputs? So that's it for the stream today. It was a very quick blow through of Nock and then a very challenging blow through of Jest module functions with some upsetness in the middle, getting riled up, but hopefully that was entertaining as well. I want to say thanks again to Test Double. Really enjoy working here. And I really enjoy their support for streaming like this and getting to share things and get the conversation started. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and I will promise you that I will not get riled up in your response. So in the chat, we're wrapping up the chat now, so see you, Mark. But in the comments later, share your thoughts. Let me know why you don't want to test the outgoing post body in your requests, or let me know why you do, or a different way of thinking of it. I would love to hear it. And again, I just want to say that however much it gets me riled up when somebody is saying things in a very black and white way, you have the freedom to choose the testing approach that works for you and the responsibility. So I hope this has gotten you thinking and given you something helpful to mull over. And if you're looking for an approach, I hope that you'll give Nock a try, and I hope it's helpful. If you would like some more help, go to Coding It Live. That's a website. You can go there. There's a link to our Discord community where you can join in and ask questions and share feedback and thoughts there. And I would love to help you out if you're working with Nock. And if you're working with one of the others, maybe there's someone in the Discord who can help you out as well. I can help with Jest module functions as well. So thanks so much for joining, and we'll be back next week with more testing. I want to follow up on some things about the accessibility testing we did last time. I think we're going to look at how to create a minimum reproducible repo of an issue and open up a GitHub issue to ask about something where we're not sure if the functionality is desired or not. We're going to do that, and then we may proceed with adding more additional test coverage to our React Native applications. So I hope you'll join in. That's next week on Tuesday, October 18th, 5 p.m. Eastern as the usual time. But yeah, thanks so much for joining in or watching the recording afterwards, and we will see you next time. Take it easy.